There are moments when you know you have to do things differently, even when you're a 140-year-old newspaper. The mission behind Northwest Passages has always been to get Spokane talking about ourselves, our ideas, and our community's future. Spokane is a great book town. Look at the amount of locally owned bookstores we have. Look at all the world-class authors who call Eastern Washington home. So why wouldn't we use books to help us have conversations we wouldn't normally have? And why not try to find outcomes no one else can see coming? Why not ask some of the biggest authors in the nation to come help us have those discussions? The idea was, how do you use books as a jumping off point to talk about much bigger things? What if we get a whole bunch of people in a room who wouldn't normally be in a room together and have them talk about our community when they might not even realize that they're talking about our community? Our first Northwest Passages event nearly 6 years ago set the tone perfectly. It was for a book about the reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone, and let's just say it was a crowd that wouldn't normally hang out together. The response was better than we ever could have imagined. They asked questions, they looked each other in the eyes, and they realized they had way more in common than they had different. It was the exact opposite of how they might behave on Facebook or Twitter. It also was exactly what we were trying to do. What happens when a community starts to act like a community again? We saw people talk about things they would never talk about, which has been the point all along. It was also about showing the value of local journalism again, how our reporters serve this community, reminding people why they love their newspaper for generations. At the same time, we started down a path no one could see coming. Northwest Passages has become one of the most popular event series in the Pacific Northwest and one of the largest newspaper-driven book clubs in the nation. It's funded local journalists and journalism projects that simply wouldn't and couldn't happen without strong financial support from our region. Now, more than 30% of our newsroom's payroll is covered by the Community Journalism Fund. These community-funded journalists have broken national stories about software problems at VA hospitals across the nation that directly led to the deaths, leading to congressional hearings and ultimately changes to make our veterans' healthcare better and safer. That DC reporter makes us the smallest news organization in the world with a bureau in our nation's capital. During the COVID pandemic, our Report for America reporter was named one of the best local health reporters in the nation. With one of the largest Ukrainian populations in the nation here in Spokane, we became the smallest news organization from the United States to send a reporter to cover the war. Except for us, it was a local story. Our speakers are interviewed live on stage by reporters, editors, or columnists from the Spokesman-Review, giving a first-hand perspective of how our journalists conduct the interviews that bring them the news 365 days a year. Newspapers are the lifeblood of local journalism. Newspapers typically employ more journalists than the rest of the local media market combined. Preserving those local journalists is an essential part of keeping democracy healthy in our country. It's true newspapers act as the fourth estate, but they also educate, unite, and inspire communities by holding up a mirror, letting a community truly see itself. That's exactly why these events and the Community Journalism Fund have become such an essential part of how journalism will not only survive, but also thrive in Eastern Washington and North Idaho. What if we could use books to talk about school safety, or environmental issues, or the return of hate, or complicated racial issues, or Native issues, or the importance of free speech, or healthcare, or even modern family life? What's it like to bring in one of the world's most famous authors to talk about education and empowerment? Or bring in a famous television travel guide so that we can better understand international politics? Or maybe it's just a great cowboy story that reminds us just how fun it is to let words take us someplace we never imagined. You never leave a Northwest Passages event feeling sad or beaten down. You feel inspired. You leave knowing you can still make a difference. You're also helping us redefine what local journalism looks like. This is journalism that's all about a community having a discussion with itself. And we can't wait to hear what you're going to have to say tonight. Welcome to Northwest Passages. Believe it, too long? Yeah, no, who said that? I'm going to show you where the inlander is. It's over there. Across the river over there. So, we are here to have some fun with a local author, and I love it. I can't wait to talk more about it. And if you don't know, I'm Rob Curley. I look like Barry Manilow's younger son. So, tonight we're going to be hosted with one of my favorite people in the newsroom, Lindsay Trefria. It's so great to have you here. It's the first time she's done it. She lost the bet. So I normally try to talk about a couple of interesting things, but I only got one thing I want to talk about tonight, and that is the return of the Black Lens. It has meant more to me. It's been something that Sandy Williams was a close friend of mine, and I couldn't wait to bring it back. And we worked on prototypes and funding, and the best part is that not only is it back for a long time, it's not going away, and we've built it so that it can employ 3 full-time journalists that never existed.
The Black Lens is important to Spokane because it's the only Black community newspaper that we have. What our founder, Sandy Williams, was able to do is use our news as a way to get the word out. And historically, that's how Black folks in America have been able to be connected, is through word. Initially spoken word, but then once we had the ability to read and write and get our voices out that way, it is important that we have this as a way to connect our community across this region. The Black Lens has a separate viewpoint from the mainstream because it does give a Black lens. When you hear stories from Black authors and Black writers and you hear their perspective and their voice, it's going to sound different. And so I think it's important that we do have that Black experience and that Black voice on issues so that folks from the Black community can feel connected and understand why it's important and how it's going to impact them and their community. We want to keep that aspect of education and information and opportunities for people to really use this as a platform for advertising and promoting their business, for people to ally with the Black community, and just bring some Black joy to Spokane. We've always got lots of issues to talk about. There's always going to be problems to solve. I really see the Black Lens building off the foundation that Sandy created, and any changes that come along the way are going to be changes that are shaped by this community. So again, this paper can be what Spokane and Spokane's Black community needs it to be. We're not going to be afraid to talk about the issues and tell stories.
So I hope you all got to see the first issue. It came out earlier this month, and it was a lot. And I want to tell you what happened that was so wild. So when we posted the job, we had amazing applicants. Like, we had a full-time staff writer from the Atlantic. We had the writer in residence from Princeton, and none of them would move to Spokane. They thought it was a telecommuting job, and I'm like, no, that's not how this job works. You have to be here. And finally, we said, well, who knows what a good and bad story is? And I don't know if you know Natasha Hill, but you do not want to get in an argument with her. So she was perfect. And then we couldn't find any reporters who wanted to move here. So we reached out to the Black community and said, if you would like to learn how journalism works, we would like to teach you. And the first group, what was it, maybe 12 people? The reason why I looked at Lindsay is, guess who taught the class? And the last one was more like 25 people. And so I love that this model really is going to be about the community talking about itself, being written by itself. And if you haven't seen that first issue, it's pretty great. But I got to see the next issue that's coming out today, and it's a humdinger. But one of my favorite parts of this first issue was our Black Voices, where we had students from across Spokane write essays and create art. And it was a magical moment. That was how we launched the Black Lens. We invited a bunch of their family and parents, and about 250 people showed up. And we gave all of them the Black Lens 5 days before everybody else did. And I want to show you what that looked like.
Joy is not lost, but is kept with perseverance. Not just delights and pleasure, but with grit and triumph. I've been given trials and tribulations. I've been given trauma and distaste. But most importantly, I've been given power to overcome.
I'm sure you've got some folks here in the audience supporting you. If you want to shout them out, show them some love.
Yes, my mother, who is an amazing Black woman and has supported me all the way. My grandmother, the president of the city council.
Right down there.
When you tell stories, that speaks to the right side of the brain. That's the creative part. That's the empathetic part. That's the part of the brain that connects with people. I think the power in storytelling is that we connect with people's hearts. I've learned over the years that nobody changes until their heart changes. You can give them all the information. You can give them all the justifications. But until their heart gets it, till it hits here, it doesn't really matter. And so stories go there.
Been there, and I'm going to run back there because my iPad is really ticked off at me tonight. I didn't let it sleep.
Erin Pringle has a complicated relationship with grief that she chronicles with stories. Unexpected Weather Events is her fourth book. She's written the novel Hazada, I Miss You, and 2 other short story collections. Whether it's surviving the death of a loved one, wonderment in the eyes of a child, or surviving life's worst challenges, Erin Pringle tempts readers' senses with an easy writing style about difficult moments in life.
I'm Erin, and this is Wake to Words and Brew Some Coffee.
She also shares her love of words and poetry on Wake to Words and Brew Some Coffee, streaming on Facebook Live weekly. But we have her here live. Leading tonight's conversation is the Spokesman-Review's Lindsay Treffry. Please welcome them both to the Northwest Passages stage.
Hello, Erin.
Hi. Oh, we're on.
Hi,
That's
everyone.
True. Okay. Corner of my smile. All right. Go ahead.
Well,
Hi.
congratulations.
Well, hey, thank you.
This book is spectacular. I know there's some people here tonight who have not read it yet. You are in for a treat. You are in for failing. You are in for a fun ride. So, this is your 4th book.
Yes.
Wow. So, you've had a collection of 2 short stories. You had the novel Hazada, I Miss You. And now we have Unexpected Weather Events.
Yeah.
At the forefront of all of these books, I see this theme of grief. And Unexpected Weather Events is not an exception to that. Could you talk a little bit about why you write on grief?
Well, this book was and when I was thinking about the stories, originally, I thought this, and I remember telling people when I was talking about Hazada in Austin, Texas, and I said, the next book, I promise, is going to be love stories. It's not going to be, there's going to be maybe a little grief, but it's love stories. And I was writing every story would start with, she fell in love with her, as like to make sure that it would do that. And it didn't do that. So this is not the book of love stories that I intended to write, and they're not love stories. They're love in a different way. No one would call them love stories. I write about grief because my life has been pervaded with it. There was just the typical grief when you grow up in a small town. I grew up in Casey, Illinois, which is a population of 3,000, and towns and villages of that size are predominantly senior citizens. And so you're constantly making friends with people who die. And then, even from my mom and her mother would write every Tuesday because my grandmother lived in Evansville, Indiana. And so my grandmother would include in her letters, swatches of whatever she was sewing, and also obituaries for, friends that my mother knew or that knew through my grandmother. So there was that pervasive. And then I was in the 80s, if anyone remembers that time, and I'm sure you do, it was non-traditional for a woman to give birth at 42. And so my mother was non-traditional at the time. Now it's just, like what we should be doing. And so all my grandparents died by the time I was 14, and one of them, Grandma Ryan, the one who wrote the letters, lived to be in her 90s. So it was almost an anomaly that I got a grandmother to last that long. And then my dad died when I was 17. It just keeps getting better. And that was after cancer. And then, and I was doing creative writing at that point and reading a lot. And so I think a lot of the stories I was writing at that time were not about grief, of course. And then I got a brief, lapse or purgatory of living without death. And then my best friend got diagnosed with pulmonary hypertension, which is a fatal disease. And so then she died when I was 26 and she was 28. And then a couple years later, when I was 29, I had just moved here, 3 weeks into living here, and my sister died by suicide. So it's almost like I have a desire to write funny stories, and to write things that make you laugh, and I have, so many interesting things I would like to talk about. But when I sit down to write, the thing I know most and best is living with grief and what it's like. And there's so much literature that doesn't talk about that. And so when I am writing, I'm sort of writing the stories that I wish I had already in my head, like the images that I needed to help me when my dad gets cancer or when my sister dies by suicide, because I was just had all of these really awful images that our society gives us, of like horror movies when somebody dies by suicide, or mystery novels, right? It's like a fun thing and that the person dies by suicide, but maybe not. Maybe it was a murder. And so that junk was just constantly going through my head when I needed other things there, And so one of the reasons when I'm writing is I don't see how any story can't contain death. In the same way, I don't see how any story can't contain children. And to not mention those or to sort of like push either of those off to the side feels like a sort of strange censorship of what reality is like, and so that's the reason why my work comes out the way it does, with lots of children, but also this sort of backdrop of reality that we're all going through, but sort of everything around us likes us to pretend that we're not. And I don't do well with pretending when everyone's pretending it's true. Like, I love to pretend, but not when we're all pretending that this is actually real. Do you know what I mean? Like, death doesn't happen, because that just knocks a person off their feet when you realize, oh no, we've all been pretending. Oh, okay. So,
Yeah.
sorry, long answer.
And when we had talked previously about this book, and I said, so did you come up with the idea of weather first as a collection, or did you think that it was a good vehicle for grief? And you said the book was actually called, you had it named something else. What was it?
Yeah, okay, so I love this title, and I wish it was the title, but my publisher said it can't be the title, but are you ready? Okay. These snow globes for sale. No, these snow globes on clearance, 75% off. These snow globes on clearance, 75% off.
Really
right?
short
Like
and
these
concise,
beautiful things that nobody wants, right? And it's like end of season, get rid of them. It's like perfect, but the editor was afraid that in the summer months, readers would consider them to be winter stories, but they're on clearance, right? So it's actually summer, probably. Right? Anyway, I was worried about the beach readers, that they would not want to read about snow or globes.
Well, we want to hear a little from. Give me the other title.
The story? Yeah, I'll just read a little bit.
Yeah, so you have a couple excerpts and a full short story you want to read, share with us.
Yeah, so I'm going to give it a go. So I'm just going to give you some excerpts so that when we talk about the stories, you sort of know, you have reference to the style. So this is the beginning of another cancer story. Before they knew of the cancer, finding a goldfinch dead in the frost was not a sign of cancer. Before their parents separated, a dead goldfinch's broken wings did not seem like the time-frozen family album, where those in the beginning of the album would vanish from the middle, having relocated to another house's frames, into new configurations, the mother taking a selfie with the children standing by a hand-hewn canoe, the picture taken by the father crouching from a museum floor, one of the few he thought to take. Their father rarely took photos. For the most part, he'd left that to their mother, from taking candids to ordering school pictures to scheduling the annual family photo. The pictures of him with the kids that do appear after the separation are more usually taken by the girlfriend at the time, and thus not in the genre of a long-lasting family, anniversaries and vacations, recitals, graduations, but those of an anthropologist's slideshow upon stumbling upon a people or place that has somehow existed outside of their mental sphere, which leads to a clutter and curiosity. There's a picture of the kids mussed from sleep on their father's plaid couch, their bare legs lifted so he can vacuum the rug beneath them. Here they are, the dad, the boy and girl, faces in profile as they peer into a cabinet of donuts. This one was taken at the YMCA outside the pool area. There, the children stand at the ping pong table, their backs to the camera, in towels and flip-flops, waiting for the direction the white ball in their father's hand will take. Of the photos taken by this or that girlfriend, only a handful made it to Walgreens and into a handheld album. The rest went wherever girlfriends and their phones go after a breakup. Probably we were deleted, the girl said to her brother, or upgraded, or lost, or on a broken SIM card. The boy did not understand. Or maybe, the girl said, they look at us from time to time and wonder how we are. Maybe they keep meaning to print the photos and drop them by Dad's apartment while he's at work. Dad can't go to work anymore, the boy said. I mean, before then. Besides, it's not like he called all his ex-girlfriends to tell them about the cancer. Why not? Said the boy. Oh, never mind. The girl and her brother stand side by side looking out the living room window. The snow came in the night, like cancer, the girl thinks, accumulating, unseen at first, and then, once seen, undeniable and everywhere. When the girl walks to school and stops at the hill above the city's expanse of rooftops, streets, and lights, she now thinks about the cancer out there, sprouting in that house or blooming in that jogger's lungs, flickering like the one light bulb on a string of Christmas lights that will shut down the whole strand before anyone notices. And the story continues. Okay? And then this is the beginning, but not the end, of a story, Room Under the Stairs. When the war came, no one believed it. This can't be, the girl's mother would say as they huddled in the room under the stairs and cornfields exploded around them. The drone of fighter planes came and went, but the girl had never seen such a plane, and so imagined them like the spray planes that flew low over the fields every summer while she played barefoot in the yard. The nearby neighbor would hurry over, curlers in her hair, and tell her to play inside because of the pesticides, just to be safe. Her mother hummed church hymns during the strikes. During artillery fire, her mother chewed her fingernails until they bled. The girl leaned against the bare concrete wall and stared up at the inside-out stairs. It is hard to sleep these days. When she does, she often dreams of everyone going on about their lives despite the war. Families driving through the park, the clank of horseshoes, a cheer from the softball field, the band shell is on fire, children whirling on the large blue merry-go-round with pedals you push and pull with your hands and feet, despite their rusty screech. In the grass, young wives rot where they fell after being shot. Fishermen stand here and there by the pond, casting out. When she wakes up, her mother asks what she dreamed, as though it's before the war and they're at the breakfast table waiting for the school bus. Back then, they told the stories of their dreams. Her mother used to dream the wild ones. Now, her mother shakes her head or shrugs when it's her turn. "You didn't dream again?" says the girl. "I don't remember enough to tell it," says her mother. "What about you?" Sometimes the girl shares the whole dream, but she's learning how to leave out parts or shift them. She'll say, "I dreamed of the park on a sunny day. The grass was green and we were on the merry-go-round. Some of our mothers lay gazing at the clouds or looking for ants." "That sounds delightful," her mother will say, and seems truly delighted. Once before the war, when her father took her to the park, she pushed the large merry-go-round, even though no one was on it. She was only big enough for the small merry-go-round by the short swings and short slide. But when her father saw a friend and went to talk to him at the fence, his back to her, she skipped to the big merry-go-round. And when she couldn't climb onto it, she held the seat and started running. It didn't feel dangerous. She ran until she felt it was hard to keep up. That's when she fell, skinning her elbows and knees on the concrete base. She covered her head and she prepared to die in the whirling mechanics. She would not grow old enough to sit on the middle of the merry-go-round like the bold teenagers in their flannel shirts and darkened eyes. Then she felt her father grab the back of her sweater and drag her out, knees burning against the concrete. So relieved to be saved, she hardly felt the spanking. The story continues.
Wow. And that is 2 of, how many stories are in that collection?
7 or 8.
8. Thank you. So for me, having read this book, the imagery and the way you describe things, it's so vivid. You put people in these scenes, and there's a few stories. The one you just read, I can just picture the playground with perfect imagery. But then there's also kind of another level, especially if you're from Spokane. Your story, Valentine's Day. I was a North Side girly, and in Valentine's Day, there's these three brothers, and they're at the Shadle Shopping Center. Back when Payless was there, and Safeway, and and in Hazada too, there's like this Midwest, storytelling, and this is like Spokane storytelling. So why choose to write about a place that you're currently in? Is it memories? Is it nostalgia? Is it realness?
I want to make my writing seem as random, as unplanned as possible. Well, Hazada, the novel, I wrote for 15 years. So I was still in my head very much in the Midwest, or the story had to be in the Midwest. I had the main big image, which was, Westfield, Illinois, which is just a few buildings and just this wide street. And there's 600 people who live there. And the school was torn down, I don't know, when I was in 5th grade. But then I had this idea of this circus coming through. And isn't that bizarre? Like but the collision of the two images of this circus coming through. And so for a long time, I was stuck in this, it's going to be the present day circus, because that's what people typically, will show, like the greatness of the circus. So even if it's present day, it's still great, but usually they'll go back to the early 1900s. And then it took me some years to realize, no, Erin. Sorry, my earrings. In Westfield, Illinois, it's going to be what the circus actually is now, right? A traveling circus right now. There's only a few acrobats. There's one elephant, and we all feel terrible about it, right? And the guy who's running the circus is just trying to retire. It's just this terrible situation, right? The reality that I do so love, right? But the beauty of putting those together, of like the small rural cornfield village falling apart, which it is, and then the reality of what the circus actually is, and both of them, at the turn into the 20th century, were huge. The illusion was there, right? The city of oil, the oil was booming in Illinois at that time, and the circus was great. But, now you can start seeing what was being covered and why people went to the circus, right? So that took a long time to write, and then now there's just more Spokane in me, because I've lived here for 14 years in August. But so it's only recently, that I've started, I'll think of a story and I'll think, oh no, that's a Spokane story. Where when I first moved here, I would never have written a Spokane story, because that would have been untrue. I know I write fiction, but I don't want to accidentally say something about a place that mischaracterizes it in a negative way without realizing I'm doing that. So, like you don't tell stories about like your grandpa's uncle's best friend, because you'd mess it up, right? So if you're going to tell about it, a story, it should be about what your grandfather told you, because you know him. So in the same way, I feel like I can tell a story but it's still very limited. It's like the Safeway parking lot in Safeway, Shadle Mall, and the kids are from the Midwest, right? So they still has that sort of like not here, not set, they didn't grow up here, because I don't, I'll stand outside my son's ballet studio when he's about to get out, and the parents will be talking to each other while they're waiting for their ballet dancers to come out. And the ones who are from here have a very particular way of talking, where they just refer to, oh yeah, Cataldo, blah, 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 blah. Do you know, like they have inside information, and you can tell that they understand through their code what they're talking about, right? Like they can just say the word and the other person will be like, But I don't want to accidentally like take that and then do it wrong. I don't want to do things wrong. That's why I've never to write about Paris, France, like that would be untrue. Hemingway could, because he did go there, right? But I'm not let me imagine what Australia is like, and I'll write about it. I don't want to perpetuate our romanticized ideas about things. That's it. I don't want to perpetuate romanticized ideas about things. Okay.
Yeah.
Did I answer that question?
Yes,
okay.
you did. And the feelings that you portray through here, it feels like a true story to your life. But I had the honor of sitting in a reading you did at Shadle Library. And I think you were reading, what was the name of it? Oh, Game of Telephone. And this beautiful short story from this book. Something I've never experienced, the loss of, I presume, a friend.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She had me blubbering. I was bawling in public, but it was that, it wasn't that I had experienced what happened in her story, it's that I had experienced those feelings of grief. I had lost my father, and the way you describe it, as a consumer, it's like, wow, somebody finally gets it. So how, you've experienced all these great losses in your life. Has this book at all helped you heal or see others heal from this work?
So I have nightmares. It'll sound like a roundabout answer, but we'll get there. So I have nightmares every single night, and I have ever since I pre-memory, So every night I have terrible nightmares, and then I wake up from them. And for a long time, for years, I don't really have recurring dreams, but if I am underwater in a dream, in a nightmare, we just call them dreams, and there are sharks, then the sharks always win. And I'm trying to get away from the sharks, or I'm swimming beside them and I'm hoping they don't notice, etc. Right? But the sharks, it's this, oh no, the shark. Here we are again. You're swimming under the ocean, and now we've got sharks. You knew this was going to happen, Erin. Anyway, so for many years, if there were an ocean dream, there would be sharks. It would be unpleasant. And then when I'm 42 now, so when I was 37, 38, I learned to swim really well. So I knew just enough growing up in a rural public pool, right, that you don't drown, you swim underwater. And I had a terrible stroke, mostly my bottom was down, and I was just but you get there because you're a kid, and no one's, in Casey, Illinois, there's no lap lanes. No one knows how to swim a lap. So when I was in my mid-30s, my partner got me swimming lessons because I said, I would love some swimming lessons. The YMCA does adult swimming lessons. So while everyone else went on dates on Friday nights, I went to the North Y, and took swimming lessons because I wanted to be able to do a triathlon. And because in 4th grade, in 4-H camp, I didn't make it to the bridge where we were supposed to swim to the bridge, and everyone made it except this one who had to climb in the canoe. So once I could swim well, I stopped having nightmares of sharks. They don't even come into my dreams. If I'm swimming, I'm fine. But I didn't take swim lessons to get rid of the sharks in my nightmares. I never would have considered that there would be any sort of connection there at all. So similarly, yes, I think the writing has helped, but not in ways that when I went to therapy, where I could clearly see, what we're talking about here, I need to work on, and it will fix this, right? This anxiety or this situation. It's more after my sister died, I would have these really, and sometimes they still happen, but it was really, really frequently. She died by hanging, and I wasn't there, and because she was in Illinois. But I would have these terrible, I'd open the closet door, and then I would just imagine her right there. And then my son was, when he wasn't born yet, but when, those bouncy, you put the little swing on your door frame, right? And then you set the kid in it so that they can get some good core strength and they can bounce and they're like learning. So we had one of those, and then the sound of the ropes. And I would be like, just flash back to my sister's death, because now it's like I was just trying to figure out how it all happened and why it happened. And so every sort of sensory near experience would become her death again, because I wasn't there. And so it was like my brain was trying to recreate it in order to understand it. So, and then of course, TV's not helpful. So in the middle of like, I don't know, Heather, it would be like we'd be watching a historical something about like otters, and then all of a sudden they'd be like, and then they used to hang the otters, and it'd be like, oh no, like back into it again. Just this constant, like I couldn't get out of it. You'd be surprised, like like when you're looking for a house to rent or a house for sale, and you haven't noticed any of the for sale signs in Spokane or wherever, you haven't seen any for rent, but as soon as you're looking or your friend's looking, all of a sudden, every single house, you're like, oh yeah, for sale, you're taking notes. And it was kind of like that, where it was just, you suddenly realize how immersed the culture is in suicide images, and often in terms of like, because it's supposed to be horrific and scare you, or, because you're going to go to hell, or because, it's everywhere, right? It's just everywhere. So in the Valentine's Day story, there's a part where the mother gives a speech at this suicide survivors meeting. It's what they call people like me, we survived. We were the left behind. But it's positive, survivors. But the speech that she gives in the middle of the meeting is very awkward. It was very similar to something that I did in an awkward meeting, where I'm just like, where people are like, oh, I could just kill myself. No, stop saying that. Like, you can't. It's not the same. So I think that there's been less of that sort of like constant imagery suffocation, or that's not the greatest word, but there's been less of that. And I think writing Hazada, which I hated writing, it's awful to write that book, because when you're writing about, at least for me, I write fiction, but to understand my characters, I go back to like something that I did understand. And so then I'm constantly kind of, almost like when you're drawing someone and you're constantly like checking their face with what you're drawing to make sure that you have the eye in line with the side of the nose and the side of the lips, and you're just making sure, right? It was that constantly with Hazada, where it was, the characters, suicide happens, and it's not about like, why did she do it? Or, oh, it's a murder, or any of that. But I had to constantly go back to the experience I had and think about it to then reframe it for the characters in the novel so that it would feel, authentic and right. So it would be right. And then I would have to go back to it and then come back to it and go back. And it was harrowing. I don't recommend it. But I feel like I sort of got rid of that book. And so it's not going to haunt into other things. And I think if I hadn't gone through that sort of process, it would be, behind everything instead of where I have more control of it coming in or going out, and also in the same way of like not being inundated by images and sounds in that way. long story short.
And in this book, though, too, I mean, there are moments of hope and joy.
Yeah.
There are. You talked about, oh gosh, she's really good at metaphors if you haven't noticed. Sharks in your dreams. And
Which is true.
It is true. I know.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
You talked about buying Oreos.
Oh, yeah.
You're going through grief, but you're still going to go shopping and buy some Oreos. Like, there's hope and joy. So
I would just feel angry, just so angry. I would just be in, multiple times. I mean, every grief room is different, right? That was the other thing you learn, as many of you know. Like, you think, okay, new death, going to go back to that same grief room, and it's going to be very similar. And it's not, the way the person dies has a great effect on the way that the grief room is formed, where you are in life, your identity, what sort of has to reshift. Like when my dad died, we knew it was coming, right? It was cancer, it was gnawing away. But with my sister, it was so sudden. I just felt like all of my memories, like memory of my sister painting my face for Halloween, and then she died by suicide, right? It's like every memory would open up, and then she died by suicide, and then she did this, and then she, you could just feel. I could feel, right? It's just like your whole identity is ripped up, and then it ends all of your memories. And I think it's one of the reasons why I wonder, because when I go back to the Midwest, no one in the family talks about it. Like, we pretend. I don't know what we pretend, but I think that's one of the reasons. Is just every single memory, you start to tell a story, right? Even if it's a funny story, and then she died by suicide. Like, every story, you can't tell a happy story, you can't take a funny story, you can't even tell a sad story, because the sad story, it's just grueling. But what was Oreos. I think this is a lot of youth coming through, and not, learning the traditions of grief and the way people react to it. Public grieving is just a confusion a lot of the times. So, where your dad just died, your best friend just died, and you go into the grocery store and Oreos are on sale, and someone's buying Oreos, and I would just think, I can't believe you're doing this. How can you be buying Oreos? Like, how can anyone put them on sale? You're all just curse word. Like, how can this be? Like, this makes zero sense to me, right? And then I'm sure that Salvador Dali was like, and so I will now paint, right? Because bizarre things are constantly happening, right? Like, all you have to say is, the other day I listened to a story about a man in Palestine who found his 8-year-old daughter's toe. And that's true. At the same time that someone's buying Oreos, and at the same time someone is gonna, maybe tomorrow we could have some coffee, maybe have a scone. It's that sort of just constant tension and jarring that I find to be so bizarre and constant in the experience of living. And so I think that drives a lot of story. Yeah.
Well, thank you for being able to open up discussions about this for people through your writing. But I also want to know what you're working on writing next.
Okay, so I'm working on a novel, but everyone is, and it's going to be 15 years before that's ready. So we don't need to talk about that. And so I've been reading Shirley Jackson, and all of you have probably read The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, because we were all assigned to read it, and she was a very popular writer in the 50s and 60s, and she's tremendous. So I just read all the Dark Tales, which are stories from her different collections, but now put in together in this new book, and then The Bird's Nest, and We Haven't Always Lived in the Glass Castle, or We Have Always Lived in the Glass Castle. I always want to say glass. I don't think there's glass. We've always lived in the castle. It's tremendous. And she's one of those writers like Flannery O'Connor, where you just start reading her and you think, you could have written this yesterday. This is so good. You know, like when people pretend like, oh, those writers have died, the experience is over. No, she's so good. So with every one of her stories, as I was reading it, I would think, oh, a story could do that, or oh, a story could do that. Like there's a story, can I say? So there's a story she writes, Shirley Jackson, where the main character is like a 19-year-old girl who grows up in this upper middle class family, and she decides that she's going to run away, and she does so well. Like she plans it out, and she's telling the story of how good she did at it, and she got away. No one noticed. She took the bus. She went to she got a job. She was going to be a secretary. She found a place to live. She and her landlady will talk about the missing girl, who is her. And, like they're looking at the newspaper and there's a picture of the missing girl. And the girl says, I think I look a little like her. And the landlady says, no, you're just being vain. Like, stop being so self-centered. It's so great. And then like on the 1-year anniversary, her mother puts out this call, please come home. And then, then the girl's like, I wonder if she was murdered or if she had a kidnapping. And then at the very end, I'm just going to tell you because it's so good, and then I've hyped it. At the very end, she ends up going back 4 years later, back to her parents' house because the neighbor took her there for a reward, and they don't recognize her. They don't recognize her at all, and they're like, I can't believe you would do this. You don't look like her. And they even ask for like inside information, which she gives them. And they say, the other girls who pretended to be our daughter also said that. And so she's just in this place like, oh, which also answers the question of why she ran away, right? They didn't ever see her. And so then they don't see her at the end either. Like the idea that they had of her was clearly what she was running away from. So it's this really interesting, no grief in that story. I mean, not a death, but you feel like it could happen, so good. She's so good. And her language, so good. Yeah. So I'm working on some short stories, and I'm really excited about them because Shirley Jackson's like, you can do that. And I think, I can do that. I mean, she's not alive anymore, but she did it. So anyway, I'm working on some stories. I have like 10 stories on my phone with the first 3 sentences, and that's all I need once I can just sit down and finish each one. So I have about 10 stories coming up the pipe. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to open up the floor to some audience questions here.
And I do have hearing aids. I don't hear so great. So if you ask a question, I would love to hear it. So if that means you use a microphone,
I think we do have a mic here.
Even if we have to wait for it to get to you.
Just raise your hand if you have a question, and then we can get this microphone right over to you. So.
Any questions so far? You want me to use that one over there? This one? Okay. So let's start with what made you start waking up with Words and Brew on Facebook Live.
Wait to Words and Brew some coffee?
Yeah.
Oh, well, because COVID. And there was Thanksgiving, the first Thanksgiving COVID, where no one was going home. I mean, I never go home for Thanksgiving, but other people I knew were going. And so I said, well, I'll just read poems to whoever wants to just join me online on Thanksgiving Day during COVID. And so we did. And I loved it because I love poetry. And so we just kept doing it. So then it became a Sunday thing. And I was getting up earlier at that time. So it was the picture that you showed was kind of surprising because I really do just wake up and go read some poems. So like there is no prep at all. It's just like, yeah, it's wait towards and brush your hair, Erin. But I don't. I just go up and read some poems. Yeah.
All right. Questions? I see. Did you?
This wonderful woman with the wonderful cardigan has a question.
It's pretty minor, but you were talking about the girl that ran away.
Yeah.
And you said there's no grief in that.
Well, I mean, it's there.
I found that very sad.
Yeah. I know. Yeah, it is, but the way she tells it's not sad. It's just like, wow, this is happening. Like, this is such an interesting story. But I often invert I've noticed I invert the feelings I'm supposed to be having. So a lot of stories that are supposed to be funny, I find just super tragic. Of just, I just take it completely the saddest way possible. And then the ones that are, are about all of this heavy stuff, but it's told lightly. I'm just enamored with the way that she was able to tell it so well, because if she hadn't and someone else told it, it would sound like a terrible Dateline episode, But it wasn't Keith Morrison narrating. It was Shirley Jackson's 19-year-old character who's really excited to get out of the house, but didn't think, and she clearly had also no feelings about her family. Just thought it was I'm gone and I'm gonna do it this way. Isn't that hilarious? Didn't. So then it makes you think more about the family and why is there no feelings in this family? Yeah.
Another question?
The way you tell stories is so interesting to me because it's like you have a thread of awareness of grief. And that thread is one that recurs through grief stories in your books, but also in our personal stories. And the interviewer just said this too, wow, you told the story and it connected to her grief with her father. Do you feel like people come to you with their grief stories and are like, oh my gosh, you made me think about this big thing and let me give it to you?
That's a good question. They're good questions, but I think so. Hazada came out. It was the book release and then COVID. So I didn't really experience that book tour of people. But the previous two books, yeah, it was more like you've affirmed something. Almost like having a sibling and you say, do you remember the time that such and such happened? And your sibling says, yeah. And then you're like, okay, yeah, so it did happen, right? So it's I think it's kind of like that. I've had that experience, of just people will just say yeah, that happened to me, but they would never tell me on the bus, right? If we were just sitting there. Not that they should, but yeah, so there's that. And then, yeah, the thread of grief, it just goes through all of us, right? But I don't... I think it's probably because story, the thing I like about story and poetry that they share in common is that the images created with the ones that are imagistic, like Prufrock, or Wallace Stevens. But the image created in your mind by the words becomes like a memory to you because you have to interpret the image through your own experiences. So I'm sure that merges in some way with something else that you already know, right? Like when Lindsay said, I could imagine that playground, and I thought, I bet it's not quite like the Casey, Illinois playground that I was describing, but I bet she put it where she is, which is why folk tales and fairy tales are so perfect, is that you hear Little Red Riding Hood, not recent editions where everything turns out great, but you can imagine her going through the forest near you, right? Like you set everything within the landscape of your own memory and imagination. And so, like when I think about wars going on, to help me understand them as I'm walking down the sidewalk, I will imagine the coffee shop in front of me just exploded, right? So but it's still my sidewalk, right? And so I think when we read, especially when images aren't forced upon us like through screens, where we're not allowed to put it into our own memory, that it does something that is kind of, it's affirming, right? Like there was one really good play. I mean, there were a lot of good plays, but this play, Night Mother by Marcia Norman, which came out in like 83 or 86 and won the Pulitzer or the big award. It's a one act and it's fantastic and you should all read it. And thank goodness I had read that in grad school, because it was a serious play about a woman who lives with her mother or lives close to her mother and tells her mother, I'm going to die by suicide tonight. And her mother, it's just that conversation is the play, is them. It starts early. You know, she tells her, I'm going to do your nails and then I'm going to die by suicide. And then her mother is in this awful position, but they talk. You get this honesty about the way they talk to each other. You can tell it's the first time they've ever like actually shared reality about things. Like, why did you always treat me like I was this? And her mother would say, well, you've had seizures since you were little. Like, this is just how we decided to talk about it. You know, like you get real relationship happening. And then the play ends the way the play said it was going to end. But it's like it was the only play that I'd ever read or story or whatever that prepared me for my sister's death, so that when it happened, I could rely back on Marcia Norman. And I would remember monologues. Like there's this really good monologue that Jessie gives as the daughter, and she says, It's like I'm on this bus and it's really crowded and it's stuffy and I know where it's going and I just want to get off, right? And that felt like the most real thing, right? Of not like, well, you know, she's had some problems, you know, because we didn't see it coming and most people don't see it coming, right? It's only the people who see foreshadowing read the story to tell you that was foreshadowing. So that play was so important. I don't even remember why I started answering a question, but yeah. What was I talking about? But thank you. Yeah, your question, yeah. Yes, about images and yes, yeah.
Up close. First of all, I love your shoes.
Thank you so much. They're flowers. They're just flowers.
She asked if you were helped by writing. Mm-hmm. I don't know that I've ever been helped by writing, but it's given me so much clarity about my own life. Has that been true for you? I write nonfiction. So.
Oh, good for you. I mean, because nonfiction is hard.
Well, so is the other.
Yeah. Clarity. I think I think some of our best times as a culture when we were grieving was in the late 1800s and early 1900s, where you could just dress in black and everyone knew what that meant, and you could wear a mourning band, and it wasn't weird to get a lock of your best friend's hair and braid it into a brooch, and people knew exactly why you were doing that, and it was beautiful and it was accepted, and people understood loss and they talked about loss, and if they saw it, they would know, just like we have the baby on board signs, so everyone's a little more careful, right? I mean, you can curse a lot of people who are not reading the baby on board signs, but that was, I feel like, such a healthy thing, right? But now, I mean, who do you talk to? I mean, I remember listening to a podcast about a mother whose son was murdered, and she sort of lost all her friends at that point, because what is she going to talk about with them? They're just going to give her the hallmark, right? Even when they try hard, right? Even when they try hard and give her, religious experiences or whatever they can try to do to compare it to in order to talk about it, it gets exhausting for friends after a while, right? And then you start to feel, and I'm going to talk now just about like grief, and then it gets exhausting for you exhausting people because it's why we have therapy, right? Because we don't talk about anything with each other, and we feel like we're creating a problem for our friends by talking about it. So then we can pay someone, and we don't have to feel bad about that person listening to our lives, right? And so writing about it, I think, I don't know if it gives, I'm sure it gives some clarity. But like when I think of clarity, I think about like when I go back, one of the times I went back to Casey, Illinois, and I saw people my age with their children at the school where we grew up, and I had this sort of like, oh, of course that's how it works, right? I only had the perspective of like the kid growing up and all the parents know each other, and that's sort of weird, but that's how it is. Like that kind of clarity when I went back. But I think in the writing, in terms of clarity, I think it's the safest place for me to be, where I'm not putting anyone out. I don't have to, you go on a first date, and eventually you have to say, like, they're like, well, what are your parents like? Oh, well, my dad's dead, right? Showstopper. Or we were listening to This American Life the other day, my partner and me, and it was parents of a son who had died by an overdose. And so they were constantly trying to figure out in social situations when to bring it up, when not to bring it up, right? Because they're going to go to a conference together, and the people around the table are going to be like, oh, so do you have children, right? Well, and then you say, well, our son died by an overdose, right? Nobody has the script for that, So I think I get the opportunity to create stories for people who also read about things that we don't talk about. It's almost like secret communication, right? So I'll tell you a story, and there's going to be some things in here that you know about, and then you take it to your private place, and then you read about these things that happen. And then we're doing, we're just doing code back and forth, right? And whereas with nonfiction, I don't like about grief, because people will give you the books. They'll give you the books. Here's something about suicide you should read, and that's not what I'm after, right? I'm after images that help me. I'm after like, yes, me too. Yes, that like when it happened with my sister, my mom, our neighbor, Mrs. Unzicker, who was like a third grade teacher for a long time, but Mrs. Unzicker is much younger than, like 30 years younger than my mom, and came to my mom and said, my brother died that way. My brother died by suicide. And I don't think there was much more to the conversation, but my mom felt so thankful, like, because otherwise it's like everyone was pretending it doesn't happen, or that it only happens elsewhere. And my mom felt so ostracized by it because she is religious, right? And because you don't do that, and because her daughter did it, and why, so now she feels like it's her fault, and that all people are blaming her. And I did feel a little blame toward her, but I feel like the culture, like set me up for that, didn't kick me and my mom. But just saying that, like, then you understand. It's like I have a friend where her brother did it, and the first time, she didn't even have to tell me. Like, we just did it, I don't know even how we did it, but it was just my brother, and I was like, and my sister, and we just knew. Like, it's like you do, like when you're gay and you have to do codes back and forth, or you used to do them a lot more than you have to do now, right? But only other gay people got the code, right? The same thing, but I do it with grief and death, right? Like, I can see in the eye, and somebody's about to say, like, that they have depression. Well, I know all about that. My dad had manic depression my entire life. So you start to read eyes, and so back to another question about, like, do other people come up and tell me about things? Like, I can see it, and like, I feel like this terrible, like, Cassandra, like, you can see it in each other, right? Like when you date people and they haven't had grief, and they're just like, how about some cheesecake? And you're like, Like, look, trying to look like further in. Like, I'd love some cheesecake, but what's your thing that we're not talking about? Do you have a thing? You don't have a thing yet. Okay, well then we need to both have things, before this goes further, because it's going to be too happy on one end, and you're going to have to explain too much, right? Well, here, read 4 of my books, and then maybe you'll realize why we're not going to have some cheesecake, Sorry, that was a long answer to a short question. The end to that answer.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Hey.
Hey, I know you.
I know you.
Okay.
I'm also a writer, and sometimes I find I will be writing a character, and it's as though, we're hanging out for a while, and then they slowly kick out a jack-in-the-box, daring me to turn it. And then I get surprised by what comes out. So I wonder if you have found that experience to be true, where your characters surprise you with the jack-in-the-box.
That's a good question. Yeah, the first thing I thought of when you asked that, when you started asking it, and I raced ahead in my brain, was there are some stories that I'll start to tell, and it's just not going to be my type of story. I'm not going to want to stay with it, whether it's the perspective or it's just not. People will want to tell the story, and people want to hear the story, but it's not. I don't want to tell that story from that way, right? Like Keith Morrison telling the story of the girl who disappears and comes back. I don't want to tell that story. Shirley Jackson does, though. She can tell that story pretty well. So a lot of times, I think that what surprises me when I'm in the process is that it just takes so long to figure out which perspective to tell the story from. And it surprises me that it takes me so long every time. Really, Erin? You could have just started it this way. Of course you could have started it, but then I don't think to. And then, characters will do things that I love, that just please me greatly. So there's this scene where, what's her name? Oh, what's the character's name in Azada? They have great names. Heza. So Heza, her mom has died by suicide. She's 9, 10 years old. And she is, the circus has come to town. It's a terrible circus. And they're in the field. The circus is set up in the field. And it's gray because it's the Midwest, this weather right now all the time. And so Heza is just sort of wandering, and she's wearing these red cowboy boots that she got at the thrift store where her mom works. So she's wearing those, and then this oversized white T-shirt. It's a really beautiful image. But she's just kind of wandering, she's just been lost. She's been lost. She's lost. And she comes upon, so I didn't see this coming. She comes upon, there's the 2 circus workers, and they make her a sandwich. They're in the middle of making a sandwich, and then they ask if she's hungry, and she could eat, and then the one guy's it's multigrain, this is important. And then the other guy's I don't care about your, and then it's this very real, these 2 circus workers, but they're not doing the circus at this moment. They're just having lunch. And then this girl, right, who has just lost everything, is red cowboy boots in the middle of a cornfield with this, it's awful, right? But this one moment, we're do you take ketchup on your sandwich? Do you eat meat? This really beautiful, these little conversations that happen, that when they happen in your life, you're just oh, that's so great, that you can have these little conversations with strangers, and they're caring conversations, right? That that's exactly what she needed. She needed someone to ask if she needed a sandwich, and then to sit in one of those cheap-ass camping chairs, right, in the middle of a soggy cornfield, and she doesn't know where her brother, and just eat a sandwich. And I just felt so good for her. And it was strange in the way that I liked those kind of jarring images together. And it felt so good. And I think that was clarity, of just giving some niceness to what is, the storm clouds overhead. Yeah. So I didn't see that, and I loved it. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for hanging out with us tonight. And we are, everyone, please. So Erin's books will be available in the lunchroom. The vending machines don't work, so we can only buy a book. But as you head out, you'll see that. So the Aunties is out there to help us. So what's next?